A man stands before thousands, weeping. His clothes are torn, hair pulled from his head and beard. He kneels in the dust before the temple, praying aloud, while a crowd gathers, men, women, children, all weeping with him. The grief is contagious, the confession public. Oh, my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift my face to you, my God, because our iniquities have risen above our heads and our guilt has grown even to the heavens. This isn't a military defeat, not famine, not plague. This is spiritual crisis. The returned exiles, survivors of 70 years in Babylon, have married foreign wives. The holy seed has become contaminated. The very sin that sent them into exile has returned. Now Ezra the scribe, priest and scholar, must do the impossible. Call for the dissolution of hundreds of marriages. Demand that men send away their wives and children. Choose between family and faith. The decision will define Judaism for the next 2,500 years. It will save a people on the brink of extinction. It will also earn him condemnation from future generations who see only cruelty in his reforms. But this moment of crisis didn't begin here. It began 80 years earlier when God moved the heart of a pagan king. Act 1. The return nobody wanted. When Cyrus freed the captives. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon and issued a decree allowing Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BCE. Isaiah had prophesied about Cyrus by name 150 years before he was born, calling him God's anointed who would let the exiles go free. The first wave returned under Zerubbabel, around 538 BCE. Approximately 50,000 people, but most Jews stayed in Babylon. By far, most of the expatriated Jews chose not to return to Jerusalem at this time, a decision that indicates how well they had been absorbed into the Babylonian way of life. Ezra was born in Babylon to a priestly family, a direct descendant of Aaron, the chief priest. He dedicated himself to Torah study and worked as a scribe, writing books of the Torah and prophets. While his people rebuilt the temple in distant Jerusalem, Ezra remained in Babylon, studying under Baruch ben Neriah, deepening his knowledge of the law. The book of Ezra records two separate time periods. Ezra's 1-6 covers the first return of Jews led by Zerubbabel, 538 to 515 BCE, and Ezra 7-10 records Ezra's later arrival. Zerubbabel's group faced immediate opposition. Samaritans and other locals offered to help build the temple, but the Jews refused. These people weren't pure enough. Offended, the locals wrote to Persian authorities accusing the Jews of rebellion. Work stopped. For years, the foundation lay incomplete while spiritual apathy ruled. Finally, prophets Haggai and Zechariah stirred the people. King Darius of Persia underwrote the building financially, hoping the Lord might bless him and his sons. The temple was completed in 516 BCE. But something was wrong. The Second Temple paled in comparison to Solomon's, and spiritually, the people were drifting. Act 2. The Scribe's Mission. When the king commissioned a teacher. Ezra traveled from town to town in Babylon, telling Jews about the impending return to Israel and temple rebuilding. His words went mostly unheeded. The majority remained in Babylon. Many even thought he was lying and sought to kill him. In 458 BCE, nearly 80 years after the first return, Persian King Artaxerxes commissioned Ezra to return to Jerusalem and teach the laws of God to any who didn't know them. This wasn't just permission, it was official authorization with political power. Ezra had unique qualifications.
included in the Aaronide line of priests authorized to perform sacrifice, and trained as a scribe in the interpretation of the law. Undeterred by rejection, Ezra gathered all who would follow, a relatively small group numbering about 1,500 men, plus women and children. He brought gold and silver for the temple, along with orders from the king to the treasurer to provide wheat, wine, oil, and salt. At the Ahava River, Ezra examined his company and discovered no Levites present. He commissioned men to recruit Levites, bringing 38 into the caravan. The journey lasted 4 months, arriving on the 1st of Av. Ezra 7:10 describes a shaping of the community in accordance with the Torah. Ezra's goal was to implement the Torah, and his impeccable priestly and scribal credentials allowed him to remain the model leader. But what he found in Jerusalem horrified him. Act 3. The spiritual catastrophe, when the holy seed was contaminated. Shortly after arriving, Ezra commenced his priestly duties. The priests and Levites had allowed temple service to deteriorate. Many went out to make a living because the temple wasn't sufficiently supported. Some had even taken wives of pagan nations, as had many other Jewish citizens. When leaders came to Ezra with this news, he tore his tunic and cloak, pulled hair from his head and beard, and sat down appalled. This reaction isn't cultural sensitivity gone mad. Idolatry was one of the sins that resulted in Judah's conquest by Babylon. Now, upon their return, Judah was again toying with the same sin. The problem was existential. Intermarriage threatened to be the main threat to the integrity and identity of the Jewish community. If the people continued marrying outside their faith and adopting those beliefs, there soon would be no distinctively Jewish community in Jerusalem. The concern that the holy seed has been intermingled with the peoples of the lands alluded to Isaiah 6:13 and the hope that even in exile the holy seed remained in the stump. If they, as the holy seed, became corrupt, what remaining hope would there be? Ezra offered one of the great intercessory prayers of the Bible, Ezra 9:5-15, confessing not his own sin, but Israel's collective guilt. He prayed at the evening sacrifice, a large crowd gathering around him. Many wept with him. Then Shechaniah, one of the leaders, made a shocking proposal.
Act 4. The impossible solution. Divorce or destruction. We have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the peoples around us, but in spite of this, there is still hope for Israel. Now let us make a covenant before our God to send away all these women and their children. Divorce. Mass divorce. Hundreds of families dissolved. Wives sent away. Children abandoned. It violated every instinct of compassion. Malachi makes God's view clear. The Lord, the God of Israel, says that he hates divorce. Yet Ezra agreed. You have been unfaithful. You have married foreign women, adding to Israel's guilt. Now honor the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples around you and from your foreign wives. Why would Ezra, a man devoted to God's law, endorse something God hates? The law warned Jews not to marry pagans, but didn't explain what to do if such marriages occurred. However, the law did address non-Jews in the Promised Land. Foreigners had to refrain from capital crimes. For impenitent sins like idolatry, divination, and child sacrifice, pagans were to be executed or driven from the land. Perhaps the pagan wives and children refused to abide by Mosaic laws. The Jews couldn't inflict capital punishment or exile under Persian rule, but they could divorce. The divorce was the means of turning from sin in repentance. Deuteronomy 13:6-11 taught that family members, including wives, who tempt husbands toward idolatry were to be executed. Divorce may have been an alternative at a time when Jews were under foreign rule. Ezra called a mandatory assembly and commanded everyone who had married a foreigner to separate from her and her children. He appointed men to conduct an investigation that took 3 months.
Ezra 10:15 names 4 leaders who disagreed with the plan to dissolve so many marriages by judicial fiat. Not everyone accepted this radical solution, but Ezra pressed forward. The book ends with a long list of guilty parties, over 100 men, including priests, Levites, singers, and gatekeepers. Families destroyed to preserve the community. Act 5. The partnership with Nehemiah. Spiritual and physical reconstruction. The walls of Jerusalem were crumbling, and enemies routinely looted the area. Resignation pervaded the people. Then Nehemiah, a Jewish government official from Babylon, arrived on a mission to fix it. He inspired people to rebuild the walls and defend themselves. Soon he was appointed governor, administering to physical needs as Ezra tended to spiritual well-being. Nehemiah and Ezra worked in tandem. Nehemiah built, Ezra taught. Nehemiah dealt with external enemies. Ezra confronted internal compromise. In a marathon public session recorded in Nehemiah 8, Ezra read the Law of Moses to the assembled people. The text describes him standing on a wooden platform, opening the scroll as all the people stood. He read from daybreak till noon, 6 hours of continuous reading. Ezra made the reading of the law in the synagogue mandatory on the Sabbath. In a way, he was responsible for much of the liturgy of worship of the Jews, so that the end of the captivity was the beginning of Judaism as we know it. Ezra also led the Men of the Great Assembly, one of the most influential groups of scholars in Jewish history. He standardized texts, established synagogue worship, and shaped the religious life that would sustain Judaism through centuries of diaspora. The issues faced by returning exiles were 1. The struggle to restore the temple, and 2. The need for spiritual reformation. Both were necessary to renew fellowship with the Lord. But the marriage controversy never fully resolved. Nehemiah 13 records the problem persisting years later, with Nehemiah responding even more violently, cursing violators, beating some, pulling out their hair. Epilogue: the legacy of separation. There is no historical consensus on Ezra's existence or mission due to lack of extra-biblical evidence and conflicting scholarly interpretations, ranging from viewing him as a historical Aramaean official to a literary figure. But his impact, whether historical person or literary construction, is undeniable. Ezra represents a turning point. Before Ezra, Israel was a nation defined by ethnicity and territory. After Ezra, Judaism became a religion defined by Torah observance and separation from pagan practices. Some modern scholars propose the Book of Ruth was written to counter Ezra's harsh assessment of foreign wives, showing how Ruth, the Moabite, became an ancestor of David. The tension remains. Rahab and Ruth, foreign women who joined Israel, are honored in the Messianic line. Yet Ezra demanded hundreds of foreign wives be sent away. From Ezra's vantage, the problem was entirely spiritual. It wasn't intermarriage with foreigners per se that caused such consternation, but foreigners who were idolaters. Ezra reformulated Deuteronomistic conceptions in priestly terms to describe intermarriage as contamination of the holy seed. Some scholars see economic motives. Ezra's reforms unified affluence and assets into one identity. Endogamic marriages had economic motivations as a central factor. Foreign wives could threaten landholding rights of returning male exiles. The reforms must be seen as purification, according to a priestly ideal of separation from all that was ritually unclean, to preserve the community's identity. It seems impossibly narrow-minded to us, yet it was absolutely necessary for the community's survival. Remember the opening. Ezra tearing his clothes, pulling his beard, weeping before thousands. That image captures the impossible position he faced: compromise and watch Judaism dissolve into paganism, or demand separations that destroyed families to save a people. He chose survival over sentiment, purity over compassion, the community over the individual. Ezra did the impossible, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. His goal was worthy in God's eyes, and he effectively used the returning Jews' sorrows for the success of rebuilding God's city and restoring worship. Ezra's reforms preserved Judaism through 2,500 years of diaspora. Without Torah-centered identity, independent of temple and territory, Judaism wouldn't have survived Roman destruction in 70 CE. The synagogue model Ezra established became the foundation for Jewish survival in exile. But the cost was real. Real women sent away, real children abandoned, real tears shed over dissolved families. The text, concerned about other matters, says nothing about the fate of divorced women and children. Their voices are silent, their pain unrecorded. Nehemiah and Ezra remain an encouragement to magnify worship as top priority, to emphasize the need and use of God's Word as the only authoritative rule for living, and to be concerned about the image God's people show the world. 3,000 years later, we're still wrestling with Ezra's question. How do you maintain identity without becoming exclusive? How do you preserve truth without crushing people? How do you protect community without sacrificing compassion? Ezra gave one answer. He chose survival. He rebuilt worship. He restored the law. He created structures that preserved Judaism when everything else, temple, land, kingdom, was stripped away. The scribe who wept became the man who rebuilt a nation, not with bricks and mortar, with Torah and tears, with separation and sacrifice, with choices that saved a people and haunted their conscience. Ezra stands at Judaism's crossroads, the moment when religion became portable, when identity became textual, when survival required separation. He was right. He had to be. Judaism survived. But was he kind? That's a different question, one the text never answers, one we're still asking.